Okay, welcome to the launch of The Power of Women by Jane Daoud. This is the 1st of August 2020. Welcome to August. I'm David Reiter, the publisher, CEO of Interactive Publications, Pty Ltd, Brisbane, Australia. There is our landing page, ipause.biz. If you have any questions about the publishing house or our store, that's a good place to start. So, Interactive Publications, Pty Ltd, is an independent publisher based in Brisbane, founded in 1997. We publish under 4 imprints: Interactive Press, which is the imprint under which Jane's book is being published; Glasshouse Books, which does our trade fiction and nonfiction in YA; IP Kids, which does our picture books and chapter books; and the Digital Publishing Center, which is the umbrella section for doing our multimedia audiobooks and that sort of thing. Okay, Interactive Press publishes poetry in print and digital formats, including audio, and distributes them globally through partners such as Ingram International, Amazon, Google, Apple, Overdrive, Wheelers, and Gazelle UK. So here we have the brilliant cover to The Power of Women by Jane. You'll notice that we have a link down below the cover image that will take you straight to the Buy Now page for the book. If you've got a pen or pencil, you can copy that down or simply go to the landing page and that will take you to the store where you can access the title. Okay, here's a brief overview of Jane. After watching female powerlifters training, Jane became curious about gladiatresses and ancient female athletes. Many stories, of course, have been omitted from history and others distorted, i.e. women were the pre-show entertainment. Outraged, Jane decided to write poems about these women from a clearer perspective, which you'll see throughout her book. And Jane's book is going to be introduced by Janice McRandal, who is the director of the Cooperative, a Center for Public Collaboration in Theological Research in Brisbane, Australia, and a research fellow at the University of Divinity. Janice's publications include Christian Doctrine and the Grammar of Difference, a contribution to feminist systematic theology, and Sarah Cockley and the Future of Systematic Theology. Her forthcoming book is The Theological and Political Reading of Sport, in which a variety of sports such as dancing, women's rugby, tennis, and test match cricket are considered within traditional theological categories. In this text, McRandal questions whether ancient theological ideas can be traced in popular cultural sports and interrogates these ideologies on the basis of gender and critical race theories, finding both practices of oppression and resources that subvert the norms of contemporary sociality.
And thank you. What a delight it is for me to be with all of you to celebrate and help launch the publication of Jane Daoud's first book. So let me start with a very simple quote. Women's sports history has 3 sources: history in all its forms, the tradition of sport, and the feminist movement. Until the 1960s, historians rarely paid attention to sport and almost never to women's sport. Thus begins the classic university textbook on women and sport. It's a reminder that to think this relation between women and sport is a very recent phenomenon. A remembering of forgotten, lost, and ignored histories that subvert so many of our basic norms and ideas about the proper bodies and stories of women. And so the last few decades have given rise to a rapid growth in scholarly literature around the practices and meanings of women engaged in sport, back through ancient sources and into the modern era of professionalisation. Jane Daoud's The Power of Women sits on the edge of these discourses, shifting the form and content to the poetic. Just like sports theory, women's poetry as a recognised field arrives late in 20th century Australian schools of thought. And I don't know if there's anyone here from New Zealand, but much the same in the New Zealand context. But just like women in sport, women in poetry were always there too, always writing, developing and challenging the histories of just what it was women have been up to these past millennia. And so The Power of Women, Daoud's publication, achieves a great deal. It takes an unthought form, the powerlifting woman, for example, and places her within the form of unthinking, poetry, helping us unthink what we've learnt. Here at the edge of language, our assumptions around gender, performativity and power are shaken. Our gaze is turned to the sites of women's vanishings, trophy rooms, ancient Greek cities, Flemington Racecourse, archaeological digs, and the front page of every sporting section we've ever seen. And new word combinations tick over, like Lisa swallows the stillness, lift like a girl. Even 8 months pregnant, she belted them all over the place. The grandmother who cannot be separated from extreme sports. Words that are meanwhile refusing the erasure of powerful women indeed. Perhaps Daoud's most provocative and successful achievement is found in the unflinching insider discourse that sits within the poetry. A hermeneutic at play available only to those who care about women in sport enough to actually follow them, and who likewise understand the complexities of women's gendered experience. Take Hope for AFL, one of the poems in the second section of the book, for example, in which Daoud places a queer woman's caregiving of a family member with disability alongside the struggle to resist the heteronormalising powers of monetised sports. Those of us who know, know. It's a defiant poetry. It refuses to cede to the rules of who's out, if you like, and who's in. All of which is to say that Jane Daoud's The Power of Women is a remarkable achievement. The poetry is incisive, playful, and moves with bodies and ideas in equal measure. This is a book to be taken seriously, but also a book to be enjoyed, which I did very much. And I offer to you, Jane, my most hearty congratulations. Please consider The Power of Women enthusiastically launched.
So I started this collection by writing about female friends who are powerlifters, observing them at the gym and admiring their physical strength and perseverance. And I have to say, watching people exercise and writing poetry is much more fun for me than lifting weights. And I assumed women must have been doing all kinds of athletic activity for centuries. So I went looking for ancient female athletes, only to discover that it wasn't simply that their stories had been left out of history, but many women had been assumed male, the title of this first poem. The journal sends ripples of surprise through archaeological circles, held up as the ideal man, even as he lay in his grave. A knife has gone through the heart of centuries of interpretation. We looked at this with our own ideas of gender roles. There were always hints, stories of Red Girl, of Shield Maidens, who were not mythological embellishments. How could so many weapons be in a woman's grave? The bones have been mislabeled. The bones got all mixed up with others. Anna's conference paper fails to coerce the establishment. There is pushback. The bones speak. The DNA confirms woman. In her lap were gaming pieces. She is the leader. The other lens used to analyse bones and sculptures was an erotic lens, as in the next poem, Unusual Distractions. The 200 square metre gladiator site is found buried in Austria. Inside rests a sculpture of a bare-chested woman in a loincloth, brandishing a scythe-like object. Historians clamour to confirm long-held theories and wild debate begins. She must have been the pre-show entertainment. She might have been a slave ordered to fight. Her arm is up because she's cleaning herself and she's holding an ancient skin scraper. Academics question each other in a flurry of consternation. What could possibly motivate her? Where is her helmet? She wouldn't risk losing a boob. Someone writes a heading, erotic impact of topless fighting. She's topless to entertain the men. She's topless because that's the norm. She's topless and fighting because she was an unusual distraction from the main act. An academic in Finland stands her ground. Helmet down, scythe high, it's her victory pose. I'll jump ahead now to the invention of the bicycle. Emma Eads, one of the first women to ride a bike in London, was attacked with bricks and stones as she pedalled. Doctors actually warned of the dire effects that cycling could have upon the Victorian lady's weak physique, from uterine displacement and infertility to the dreadful condition of bicycle face, an unattractive condition characterised by a hard, clenched jaw and bulging eyes. So this next poem is called Reactive Fear. Where are you going, my pretty maid, worthy of the attention of the historian, gazing upon you, hesitating between desire and dread as to its properness, and stalling as to the truth? It seems that woman is riding her way to suffrage. No one can boldly say, there you are. What really is a woman's sphere? Between Boston and Cincinnati lies a happy medium where she shows neither too much intellect nor too much physical vigour nor sweat. The bike. Where is the final home base? When she began her boxing career in the 1940s, Barbara Buttrick, dubbed the Mighty Atom, was branded monstrous and an insult to womanhood. She trained mostly with men and only ever lost one match to a woman. Her poem is called Opposition. Steak, beer, beef up, champion. Mighty atom stares, fighting woman in a man's world. Girls are not the delicate flowers they used to be. Peace overcomes her. Now that boxing is accepted, my life is accepted too. So few women in the ring. She fought men worldwide. The eye of the tiger, 4'11", only ever one loss to a woman. And now I'll jump ahead to a New Zealand athlete, Valerie Adams, who was simply able to choose to be a professional athlete. It's called Date with Destiny. Jean-Pierre found the missing mojo high up in Maglengan, Olympic hype skulking somewhere miles below. The all-consuming goal poised at the door next to the Kiwi jandals. An athlete possessed. But it's time for normal on this Swiss summer evening. The biggest expectations come from within. The exclusive global group smirks and raises an eyebrow. It's a pivotal period. Sign me off on every event, coach. You have to understand that dominating the sport made life too easy, the mind too relaxed, the body too elated. Surgery, the suffering before the rebirth. I see now where I am. I sign off on my own terms. Me, the mojo, and Maglengan Mountains. We'll make more than 20 metres. And then we have women who come to sporting success later in life. Sister Madonna in America had a delightful revelation that led to her running marathons. And this is her poem. It's called The Iron Nun, Enlightenment for Athletes from Sister Madonna. Listen to the call deep within to take up a second calling. When God says, my child, become an Iron Man, for this will be good for you. Listen to the spiritual director on retreat who says, sister, you must run, it will be good for you. Listen to your body when it says, run to Mass in the morning. Run to the prisoners who rely on you daily for courage and for prayer. Listen to the inner child. This is the most pure, creative, unadulterated person you will ever be. Listen to the body. Listen to God. Run. And I'll give the last word to Wilma Rudolph, who in 1960 became the first American woman to win 3 gold medals in track and field at a single Olympics, despite being a very sick child. She not only had to overcome sexism, but also racism. She will not walk, sickly child, face pressed to the pain, so quit the wondering and work. Stotting the brace, the venerable tiger bells pounce, all power and calm, sleeping between races, beloved black gazelle 3-meter win, black pride emerging, naming turned on its head, now the driver, subversion through success. The 1960 Tennessee Victory Parade, there will be no segregation. Face turned to the crowd, she will not walk.
Thank you very much, Jane. That was a spirited reading. We have some time left over that we can get involved in a Q&A. So do we have any questions from the floor of Jane?
Yes, sir. Jane, I was listening to the story of the nun, and I was really interested when you talked about her coming to a sport late in life. Can you tell us a bit more about that story and how old she was, and perhaps how that impacted her in her religious life?
Sure, that's a great question, and she does have a book that I've got if anyone would like to borrow it. Now, I think from memory she was pretty close to 60, I think, when she started running marathons, getting close to retirement age, and just sort of one of those, I guess, revelations, one of those moments when you suddenly decide, with my life, I need to balance myself up. I need to embody my life in a different way. So she just started running, but set the goal pretty quickly, pretty early on to run a marathon. So if that was me, I would have just decided to start running around the block a couple of times. That would have been my goal. But for her, her goal was it's going to be a marathon. She obviously must have felt some sort of need to set some really big goal for herself. So she started her training by running to the prison where she was a chaplain, and just running everywhere instead of driving or biking. And has been running marathons for a number of years. I'm presuming now she's, I think she's getting close to 80 from memory. So yeah, I'm not sure when she's going to stop. She might run till the day she dies. But it was interesting. She actually went to her priest and said, I don't know, she must have had some sort of questions about it all. And she said, particularly sort of suddenly becoming so goal-oriented and so focused on her training, and was wondering if that was going to impact her spiritual life. And the priest just sort of laughed and said, oh gosh, if I could get the men running, that would be a real achievement. So he really backed her. And then, people just were so impressed to see an older person running marathons, because of course there's these ideas that you don't do extreme sports or you don't do marathons unless you're sort of really young and fit and looking a certain way. And she was known for being a nun, so she's simply always now been referred to as Sister Madonna, the marathon runner. So yes, I can only assume that it's made her life fuller and richer, and she's from what I've read, she's loved it.
Thanks very much, Jane. Any other questions?
Yep. Oh, just a comment. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Claire.
I really enjoyed your reading, and I really like the images that go with the poetry. It's very profound, and I found it deeply moving. And as you know, I am a cyclist, so that's why I smiled a bit at Reactive Fear. Wondering if I've got a set cyclist face. But yeah, it was more just a comment than a question. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Lovely to hear from you. And it is, the writing the collection started off just sort of as curiosity and a bit of fun. But the more I wrote, the more frustrated I got, because there are just so many stories that aren't told. And then when you find out, I mean, I've always known that it's been a long journey for equality for women, but to hear things like bicycle face, and that women had bricks thrown at them for riding a bike, and that doctors said you could become infertile. It just brought this whole new level of outrage.
Any other questions?
I've got one, David.
Sure, go.
Jane, I'm wondering, how difficult was it to research the women? I mean, just then in your last comment, you said there was a lot of stories. I mean, did you have difficulty narrowing it down to the ones that you finally chose to feature? Or was it, I mean, how easy was it to find out their stories?
It's a really good question, because so many of my stories I stumbled across in Google searches, and I then became fascinated by archaeology and started looking for stories in archaeological journals. And that's when I discovered that there were a whole lot of archaeologists overturning all these previous ideas or previous conclusions that they'd come to about bones being male warriors. So all these, apparently unsolved mysteries were actually women who were warriors or gladiatrices or fighters or athletes of some sort. So for such a long time, there were these unsolved mysteries. Why does this set of bones that look more like a female pelvis, why have they got weapons and why have they got gaming pieces? And it just doesn't make sense. So then I just a whole lot more stories from centuries back that haven't emerged yet or haven't been told, because archaeologists were looking through a narrow lens, thinking, well, this couldn't have been a woman, because we couldn't have a woman leading an army. So the poem about gaming pieces, initially archaeologists thought that it was a woman buried with her children's toys, and actually it was a woman who led an entire army. So there's all these stories that are kind of stuck in time because of the lens that was being used to understand.
Thanks, Jane.
There's a few well-known sort of women like the Queen Boadicea and Joan of Arc, people like that in history, but you're looking more for the people that were sort of unspoken about. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And the women that did things that didn't fit with expectations of women. So the idea that women were gladiators or gladiatrices, which is the female term, has been considered to be a mythological story for such a long time. And there is evidence now emerging that women were gladiators. They weren't just running around topless as the pre-show entertainment. They were actually fighting.
I noticed that Larice Gilbert is with us from New Zealand, and Larice has had some input into this collection as it develops. Would you like to have any Anything to say about that, Louise?
Thanks, David. It's Loris, but
Oh, sorry.
yeah, no, I was involved from quite an early stage when Jane was still kind of struggling with the first few poems about the powerhouse, and they just kind of took off from there. It was a lovely journey to accompany somebody on, because I learned such a lot. By the time the collection was finished, I knew far more about women in sport and physical endeavours than I ever thought I would know. So it's been absolutely lovely, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the whole process.
Yeah, I wondered, I mean, lots of the ones you've talked about is in terms of individuals. Do you think, I mean, one of the things that's a big, I mean, one of the shocking things for me is the way in which in the beautiful game, world game, football, that, you know, women's football was quite strong in the 20s. And then we went into, in the Western world, into sort of the dark ages for, 50 years or so, because that was a group sport. And I wonder whether it's easier, you felt that that's a chain, or whether or not women had been able to combine, you know, to express themselves as a group or a community in the past, whether or not this is a changing phenomenon we have now, rather than, you know, an isolated, relatively isolated individuals. Though I agree with you, I suspect there were far more than we've given credit for. And the lenses that you've shown, that was a brilliant way of seeing the way in which we view history is, we exclude this stuff straight away often.
Yes, and as far as I'm aware, in terms of women getting paid professionally to play AFL, that was a long drawn out battle, and they had to work very, very hard to get funding for women's sport. So I think there's certainly been groups more recently pushing to get even just time on TV, having the matches shown on TV, and to be paid to be a professional athlete. But I'm not sure about historically. I think the women being allowed to ride bikes sort of coincided with suffrage. So there was sort of a kind of another movement to be sort of taking that onto. But prior to that,
sure. I mean, I thought that was horrible. I mean, I can think of descriptions where people just talk about, suffragists talk about just selling newspapers on the corner of the street because they're entering public men's space, the public world. And I guess if you're on a bicycle as well, you're even more dynamically so. But you're kind of supported by a movement there which enables a little bit more support, but you're still very, very vulnerable, aren't you? Like bricks and things you go by.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I can only imagine what it feels like to have an article about you in the newspaper with the words monstrous and, you know, offensive to femininity and things like that. It must have been a very difficult road for a lot of women. So very grateful to be born when I was.
Thank you very much, Jane. I think that's about all the time that we have. So would everyone like to give us a round of applause or a wave? whatever we can do. Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming, taking time out of your Saturday afternoon. Again, you've got the link to the book on our website, and please share the word with your friends and your networks so we can reach out via Zoom to a whole new world.